Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida. He was the former director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management.
So, Congressman, I just want to make sure I'm getting this right. You have Noem arguing FEMA should financially support states that are undergoing disasters, but leave the actual emergency response to those states. In your opinion, is that the most effective model?
Well, I think the best way I can sum it up is when Donald Trump was talking about Israel and Iran as he was boarding the helicopter. He said, they don't know what the F they're doing. And Kristi Noem has no idea what she's doing. Okay? FEMA is cutting the grant that gives states money to build their capacity, at the same time telling them they need to build more capacity. She's been pausing grants of $10 billion for previously approved disasters. They cut 20% of the workforce, and every decision has to come to her. Okay, David Richardson, who's the new FEMA administrator or acting administrator, has zero emergency management experience. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he's not going to do anything without Kristi Noem's approval. So when we see reports that they didn't send swiftwater rescue crews for 72 hours, that's because Kristi Noem didn't approve it for 72 hours. Let me tell you, by the time those crews arrived, they were useless, okay, after 72 hours. When I was the director in Florida, the way that would have worked is the regional administrator would have woken me up in the middle of the night when those alerts were going on. If not the regional administrator, the weather folks who work in the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, would have woken me up, or my deputy, in the middle of the night. We would have turned on the Emergency Operations Center. We would have gone to a level 1, and FEMA would have automatically moved those swiftwater rescue crews, Task Force 1 and Task Force 2, would have moved them. Without my permission, they would have done it, because that was their job. That did not happen here. Right. And so today I sent a letter to both the Homeland Security Committee and the Transportation Committee asking for a full investigation on the timeline of when decisions were made and why they've deviated from known protocols. And it's questionable whether these decisions may have caused additional death in Texas.
I think that is a very important point, Congressman. You know, some could argue that the inaction of the Homeland Security Secretary did, in fact, result in deaths. A lot is being said about FEMA as of late. You know, this has been particularly an agency that has been in the crosshairs of this administration. Is FEMA necessary from your perspective? And if so, why?
Well, it's not only necessary, it's mandatory. First of all, it's congressionally mandated. So the executive branch can't get rid of it without Congress. They can break it, which is what they've done. Look, the industry has known that FEMA has needed reform for some time. I've been running a bill for 3 years to get FEMA out of Homeland because it's hard for an agency that requires speed to work in an agency that is a giant bureaucracy. So Homeland has been slowing FEMA down for years. So I actually have that bill with Byron Donalds. It's bipartisan. He's running for governor of Florida. I got Thom Tillis in the Senate and Padilla, Senator Padilla, both North Carolina and California, who experienced major disasters, to get FEMA out of Homeland. There's additional reforms that we could do at FEMA with block grants and things of that nature. But look, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, they go bankrupt without FEMA. They get a hurricane this summer, they don't get FEMA money, they're bankrupt. South Carolina, North Carolina, bankrupt. Okay, you get into the states that deal with Tornado Alley, bankrupt. Okay, Tennessee, Kentucky, Kansas, these states go bankrupt without FEMA. So we need to move from the ridiculousness of getting rid of FEMA and figure out what reforms we can make to make FEMA better and faster. But that's not what Kristi Noem is doing. She's actually made it worse. She's made FEMA less responsive, so much for efficiency and DOGE. Okay, and so, you know, this is just my belief, I actually don't think the West Wing knows how bad FEMA is right now, and they are not even aware the damage that Kristi Noem has done to the agency, and they're not going to find out until real time. God forbid we get a real big storm this summer. I'm worried that FEMA is not prepared, and it's all because of what the secretary has done. And then what she's going to say is, oh, see, we told you FEMA wasn't ready. No, no, no. You took something that needed reform and you broke it to the point that it barely can function.
Hey, Congressman, I think everyone can hear the urgency and the concern in your voice. I certainly appreciate the way you opened this conversation with that quote. I want to quote you in a tweet this morning, noting, as the former emergency management director of Florida, I'm calling for an immediate investigation at Homeland GOP, Homeland Dems, and Transportation Dems, Transport Dems at Transport GOP. If accurate, this is a major deviation from FEMA protocol, may have slowed down response and been a contributing factor. This was in response to the CNN reporting that Kristi Noem didn't authorize FEMA's response, deployment of its urban search and rescue teams until more than 72 hours after the flooding began. When Kristen Welker asked the president about Noem's policy of her slow response, Mr. Trump said, I don't know anything about it. We were right on time. She's done a great job. So, sir, I will give you an opportunity to expand on the point that you just made about the preparedness or the lack thereof of this administration and its control of FEMA as we get ready, because it surprises me, sir, that these red states that you just named are not concerned about what could come if they get, a big tornado, a big hurricane this season.
Yeah, Michael Brown was doing a great job right before he was fired. So, at the end of the day, she's going to find herself to be the next Michael Brown if she gets a big storm and the agency is not ready because of her actions. The reason why I'm so animated is, look, I was an emergency management director in Florida, a Democrat for a Republican governor. Okay, this is supposed to be nonpartisan. It's supposed to be bipartisan. Okay, we're supposed to take the politics out of all of this. And that's why I'm so alarmed based on the decisions that she has made that I really think a lot of people don't know. If you talk to members of Congress, you talk to Republicans from Louisiana and Mississippi or in Georgia, okay, they want FEMA reform, but they don't want FEMA removal. They're well aware that FEMA is necessary. And so, yeah, I think this administration, when the president says, he doesn't know, that's right. I think they actually don't know how bad Kristi Noem has made FEMA. Do you know right now the regional administrator position in Florida is vacant? We don't have a regional administrator in Region 4. It's vacant. You got regional offices that are 20, 30% empty because they were forced to leave. Those are the people that call the state directors. Those are the people who know the county administrators. If you look at what happened in Texas, evacuations are done at the local level in coordination with the state. And so she has no idea what she's doing. The best thing that she can do now is sponsor my bill, get FEMA out of Homeland, get it away from her, okay, so that we can start reforming and rebuilding the agency. I mean, this is an agency that's literally responsible, right, for the contingency plans for government. God forbid we had a major disaster, a war, some sort of, unbelievable event, okay? And she's breaking it to the point where it can't function.
They can do that to anyone. Many people have said that since Donald Trump has ordered people snatched out of their homes or off the streets in this country and shipped off to foreign countries, sometimes countries that person has never visited. I, for one, wasn't sure that that was true the first time I heard that statement. Surely that couldn't happen to someone who was in the United States legally. But then it did. And then I said that it could happen to anyone. I never would have thought that it would have happened to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was the subject of a court order saying that he specifically could not be deported to El Salvador, and then Donald Trump deported him to El Salvador. And when it was discovered to be a mistake, One lawyer in the Justice Department admitted in court that it was a mistake, and that lawyer got fired. And now that lawyer is saying they can do that to anyone. And that lawyer is the most credible source you can possibly hear on what they can do to you. And he says they can do that to anyone. That's how real it is. That's how much reason you have to begin considering always having your passport with you, always being able to prove that you're a citizen of this country. For years now, the United States government has been issuing traditional full-size passports and this is important now, more important than ever, passport cards, which are about the size of driver's licenses. They look like driver's licenses and are available for $30 from the passport agency, and they work as passports. With Canada and Mexico, they don't work as passports everywhere in the world, but they would be accepted as identification as for you being a United States citizen in this country. And as a public service announcement tonight, if you don't have one of those passport cards, now is a very good time to apply for one. You should always have to have it in your pocket now in the United States of America, because the United States of America has finally become that place where you might have to show your papers if masked men carrying weapons of war jump out of unmarked vans and try to drag you into one of those vans. They can do that to anyone. Those chilling words that we used to hear in movie dialogue about Nazis, papers please, are now more chilling than ever, because we now live in a country where if you don't have the ability to prove you're a citizen at all times in your pocket, they can do that to you, because they can do that to anyone. The lawyer who admitted in court that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was removed from this country by mistake is named Erez Raveni. He lost his job in the Trump Justice Department for telling a federal judge the truth. That is a reason you can be fired by Donald Trump's Justice Department, telling a judge the truth. Prior to Donald Trump's Justice Department, you could be fired from your job in the Justice Department if you did not tell a judge the truth. Erez Raveni has now become a whistleblower who has informed the Senate Judiciary Committee about the workings of the Justice Department and defying judges' orders under the guidance of the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove, whose previous job was Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer. And just a couple of months of serving in Donald Trump's Justice Department, doing Donald Trump's wishes, Donald Trump has nominated Emil Bove for a judgeship on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. Supreme Court justices usually are chosen from courts of appeals. Emil Bove's elevation to a Federal Circuit Court of Appeals may very well be step one in Donald Trump's plan to put his last criminal defense lawyer on the United States Supreme Court for the next 40 or 50 years. Emil Bove is 44 years old, and Emil Bove has proved he will do anything for his former criminal defendant client, Donald Trump. Politico obtained emails and text messages, turned over to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and published them on the Politico website today. Politico reports the newly released messages reinforce claims by whistleblower Erez Raveni that Emil Bove played a key role in a decision by Trump administration immigration officials to turn scores of Venezuelan immigrants over to El Salvador's government, despite a U.S. judge's order not to do so. Many of the messages pertain to an extraordinary showdown on March 15th, when immigrant rights lawyers persuaded a federal judge in Washington, James Boasberg, to order the administration to halt an in-progress deportation of 130 Venezuelans to El Salvador. Boasberg ordered that planes containing the men who Trump deemed alien enemies under a wartime law be turned around if necessary, and in any event that the men not be handed over to the Salvadoran government. The messages show that in the hours after Boasberg's ruling, Raveni repeatedly relayed to colleagues that the immigrants covered by the judge's order should not be turned over to El Salvador. The material included emails saying, quote, "The judge specifically ordered us to not remove anyone in the class and to return anyone in the air. No one subject to the Alien Enemies Act in our custody can be removed, and anyone in the air should be returned unless they have a Title VIII final order. Please confirm receipt and let us know what, if anything, is happening." When Erez Raveni heard nothing in response, he texted a colleague at the Justice Department saying, quote, "Guess we're going to say F you to the court. Super." To which his colleague responded, quote, "Well, Pamela Jo Bondi is, not you." Politico notes that in one of the newly disclosed emails, the acting head of the Justice Department's Civil Division told Erez Raveni that the men were transported to El Salvador and delivered to that prison in El Salvador based on legal advice given by Emil Bove. The email says, quote, "I have been told by the Office of the Deputy Attorney General that the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, Emil Bove, advised DHS last night that the deplaning of the flights that had departed U.S. airspace prior to the court's minute order was permissible under the law and the court's order." A few days later, Erez Raveni texted a colleague, quote, "At this point, why don't we just submit an emoji of a middle finger as our filing?" In an interview with the New York Times today, Erez Raveni said this: "If they can do this sort of thing to Abrego Garcia, to 238 people that nobody knows, and send them to CCOT forever with no due process, they can do that to anyone," said Mr. Raveni. It should be deeply worrisome to anyone who cares about their safety and their liberty that the government can, without showing evidence to anyone of anything, spirit you away on a plane to wherever, forever. To wherever, forever. They can do that to anyone. Erez Raveni told the New York Times the Department of Justice is thumbing its nose at the courts and putting Justice Department attorneys in an impossible position where they have to choose between loyalty to the agenda of the president and their duty to the court. The New York Times reported on Erez Raveni's motivation as a whistleblower. Mr. Raveni said he came forward for reasons larger than Mr. Bove's judicial nomination, concerned by what he described as a degradation of the principles of honesty to the courts that have long guided the Justice Department. He noted that he has never been a member of a political party and spent the first Trump administration zealously defending its immigration policies in court. But what the administration has sought to do in recent months was far different, he said, a deliberate strategy of deceiving and disregarding federal judges. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, will join us to consider what this new information means for the Senate's upcoming vote on Emil Bove's confirmation. The most important new development today in the turbulent sea of government chaos, confusion, and lawlessness unleashed by the inauguration of Donald Trump is that a federal district court judge in New Hampshire, appointed by Republican President George W. Bush, has said no to Donald Trump and issued a nationwide injunction to stop Donald Trump's most blatant violation of the Constitution. The ruling comes 13 days after the United States Supreme Court struck down a nationwide injunction issued by another federal district court judge on the same subject, Donald Trump's unconstitutional executive order denying birthright citizenship to babies born in this country whose parents are not citizens. The problem with Donald Trump's executive order is, of course, that the United States Constitution says in clear English that all babies born in this country have a right to citizenship, except in the very few cases involving babies born to diplomats and other personnel from foreign countries serving at embassies and elsewhere in the United States. When the Supreme Court struck down another district court judge's nationwide injunction against Donald Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship, the Supreme Court specifically said that the only way a nationwide injunction could be issued by a federal district court judge in such a case or in any other case is that the judge would first have to certify a class action lawsuit, which is exactly what Judge Joseph LaPlante did in that New Hampshire case. The class of plaintiffs that Judge LaPlante certified as legitimate class action plaintiffs are babies born in the United States who could be denied citizenship by Donald Trump's order. Those babies have pseudonyms in the lawsuit, first names only. Page 5. Petitioner Sarah is the daughter of petitioner Susan, a citizen of Taiwan. Susan and Sarah reside in Utah. Susan has lived in the United States for 12 years. She is currently in the United States on a student visa and is in the process of applying for lawful permanent resident status based on an approved employment-based visa. Her husband, the father of her children, is not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. Susan gave birth to Sarah in Utah in April 2025 and applied for a United States passport for the child. She has 3 other children, all of whom are U.S. citizens. The judge describes other babies who are the plaintiffs in this class action case. And in the judge's 38-page ruling today, most of the 38 pages describes why those babies are certified as a class under the class action rules. The judge wrote, "This court has no hesitation determining this situation warrants emergency injunctive relief and class certification. The executive order would reverse a nationally known and recognized government policy in place for over a century and affect thousands of families." Judge LaPlante wrote, "Petitioners will likely succeed in claiming that the executive order violates the 14th Amendment. The 3 other district courts assessing the constitutionality of the executive order also found that the plaintiffs would likely succeed. The executive order flouts the plain language of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, conflicts with binding Supreme Court precedent, and runs counter to our nation's 250-year history of citizenship by birth. The denial of citizenship to the plaintiffs' members' children would render the children either undocumented non-citizens or stateless entirely. The children would risk deportation to countries they have never visited. The loss of birthright citizenship, even if temporary and later restored at the conclusion of litigation, has cascading effects that would cut across a young child's life and the life of that child's family, very likely leaving permanent scars. Donald Trump doesn't care about those scars. Emil Bove doesn't care about those scars. Everyone working with and for Donald Trump to try to rip out a clause of the Constitution and hurt those babies does not care about leaving permanent scars. In court today, Judge LaPlante said that birthright citizenship is, quote, the greatest privilege that exists in the world.
It is day 172, take a breath on that one, of the second Trump administration. Donald Trump's new deadline for countries to make trade deals or face huge tariffs is now officially 3 weeks away from tomorrow. And tonight, he is threatening a new whopping 35% tariff on goods from Canada, one of America's top 3 trading partners. Canada, the Great White North. And for those who are keeping score at home, thus far, the administration has published just 23 letters and announced 0 new trade deals. Today, he told NBC's Kristen Welker that he plans to impose blanket tariffs of 15 or 20% on all remaining countries. And his former vice president, Mike Pence, yes, Mike Pence is back. He is giving Trump's plans a major reality check, and he is saying it on the record. Watch this.
if we have a unilateral tariff of 10% on the American economy of all imported goods, that's 4 times the average tariff today. I saw Secretary Bessent speaking very glowingly about the projection is $300 billion in tariff revenue this year. Well, tariffs are a tax, and American importers and businesses and ultimately consumers pay almost all of that. And so literally a week after we managed to extend the Trump-Pence tax cuts and prevent a $2,000 tax increase on working families, the administration is right now boasting of the fact that that the average American household is going to see about $3,000 increase in the cost of goods because we're paying that.
That is correct. And do you know who knows that is correct? Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Meanwhile, the U.S. is resuming deliveries of some weapons to Ukraine starting tomorrow. That is according to a U.S. official and a source familiar. It will be the first weapons delivery since Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth paused them, a decision that Trump claims he did not know about and has since reversed. Today, Trump's Secretary of State Marco Rubio also had a big day meeting with Russia's foreign minister. And the secretary came out of the meeting saying they exchanged what he called new ideas about how to end the war. But to be clear, Rubio met with an official from the country that invaded Ukraine, the same country that also just hours before those optimistic comments launched a massive attack on Kyiv, where more than 400 drones and missiles hit the Ukrainian capital. City officials there say the attack killed 2 and injured at least 17 others. While in Washington, both House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune said they are prepared to move forward with new sanctions on Russia. But of course, it will likely come down to whether or not President Trump supports that move. And tonight, the president said he will have a major statement on Russia come Monday. We got a lot to cover, so let's get smarter with the help of our lead-off panel tonight. Peter Baker joins us, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Daniela Diaz, a congressional reporter for Notice. And Nayyera Haq, former White House senior director and former State Department senior advisor. She is now the assistant dean for Syracuse Maxwell School in D.C. Mr. Baker, I turn to you first. The president is now making a big threat against truly our closest ally and neighbor, Canada. He is talking about raising a blanket tariff rate as high as 20%. Help me out. To me, this just seems like chaos. Chaos with no strategy or reason behind it.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we had so many different threats, so many different deadlines, so many different announcements at this point that it's hard to know which one to take seriously. But if it turns out that we do impose a 20% tariff on Canada that actually goes into effect, that's going to have a major effect on consumer goods because we get a lot. Canada is one of our 2 largest trading partners along with Mexico. A lot of things come over the border there, and it's going to be seen on the shelves here in the United States. One of the reasons Donald Trump won the election last year was because of inflation, because people perceived prices to be going up too much under Biden, even though the inflation rate did come down by the time of the election. Well, a 20% tariff rate means on those goods coming over the border, it's going to be higher than the inflation rate at its worst under Biden, right? And I think that this is something that's going to shock a lot of consumers at some point if they start to see shelves emptying out and prices going up.
The key words are at some point. Daniela, let's talk about Mike Pence, the president's former VP, who on many, many issues still stands in line with President Trump. He broke it down today, saying all of the proposed tariffs are a tax, even the 10% baseline, and it is American consumers and businesses that will pay the cost. Mike Pence knows this. Republicans on the Hill know it. Treasury Secretary Bessent knows it, and yet they are still accepting that the president is misrepresenting the way these tariffs work.
I mean, Stephanie, to be clear, Pence is not the leader of the Republican Party anymore. You know, I remember when I was covering Mike Pence when he was the vice president, and it's a very different Republican Party now than the one he's currently criticizing and the moves that President Donald Trump is making. Look, obviously, he's going to come out and say that he does not agree with the decision that Trump is making to try to bring these countries to the negotiating table with these blanket tariffs. But it is interesting to see that he compares it to what Trump did his first administration, noting those differences in this interview with Bloomberg, saying, of course, when I was vice president, we did a completely different method to try to negotiate with countries on trade. And it seems that what President Donald Trump is doing this time around is not going to work. So hearing that from him is interesting, but it is notable that the Republican Party, those Congress members that I talk to on Capitol Hill every single day, Republicans, are still standing by the Donald Trump's method to try to bring these countries to the negotiating table, even our allies.
He also said something very interesting about China and how that what the president is doing on trade is hurting our own effort to rein in China, which is the purpose of this trade war to begin with, by going after our closest trading partners and not using them as our actual allies. Nayara, is this a consequence of Trump always feeling like he has to go big, go alone, and sort of doesn't need anyone? He's the man.
Absolutely. And you're seeing so much emotion and bravado in what usually ends up being a very calculated situation, right? You know, tariffs end up matching some other economic tools or some other pressure, ongoing negotiation with a country. But we see these changes in tariffs over and over again and levied against our allies, not our enemies. So that particularly Canada, it seems a bit more than baffling at this point, the bullying tactics against Canada, when China is effectively now running free across not only the African continent, but now building relationships in Europe and North Africa, if for no other reason than China is a stable partner, right? And that's part of the challenge here is the instability of the United States. The United States not being a reliable partner makes it easier for countries to actually go with a country like China, where they do not have basic values in common. The economic systems are different, but they'll do that, A, for the products that you can get from China that frankly everybody in the world at this point is dependent on, and B, because they know what they're getting and they think it'll be consistent.
Peter, I'm always glad you're here, but today when we got so much Russia news, I was especially excited. So bring us back to your Moscow days, because I need this explained, right? The president is now saying he's making a big Russia statement come next week. And at the same time, America is restarting our weapons shipments to Ukraine. What do you think is going on here?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, you heard President Trump just this week express great consternation with Vladimir Putin, that Putin is giving us nothing but, and you can fill in the word here, it's not a word we usually say on television. And it may be that Donald Trump is the last person in Washington to recognize that Putin is trying to play the United States and not really interested in a peace deal. But he does seem to be recognizing that now. And that raises all kinds of questions. Does that mean then the bromance that he has had with Vladimir Putin over the last 10 years, really even longer than that, is in fact fraying or not? Will he take that frustration that he's feeling with Putin's resistance to a peace deal and do anything more for Ukraine? We're at the end of the assistance that was approved under Biden. The stuff that's going to Ukraine right now that he's restarted is stuff that was approved during the Biden administration. Trump has done nothing beyond what Biden did to help Ukraine. Is he going to, at some point, do that? Is he going to approve this new sanctions legislation that Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal are pushing through the Senate, which would punish Russia even further? It may be that's the announcement he has in mind. He likes leverage, obviously. It may be his way of saying to Putin, you need to come back, otherwise I genuinely will come after you. We'll see if he follows through on that.
Nayara, do you believe that this shows that the president's relationship with NATO is getting better, and perhaps his relationship with Putin, which many of us thought was sort of bulletproof, may actually be deteriorating?
Oh, I think this is a blip in the usual relationship that we've seen over multiple years between Trump and Putin, probably exacerbated by the fact that there's egg on Trump's face at this point, right? On one hand, having given so much to Putin, gone to our allies at the G7 and argued for the re-inclusion of Russia, saying that Russia has been unfairly punished all these years, to yelling at Zelensky. Like, there's a whole host of things that he's done done to not only undermine Ukraine, but also to undermine the relationship with NATO. So this is actually the aberration in what we've come to know from Trump. Is it a welcome aberration? Yes. Is it probably driven by some kind of embarrassment about realizing that Putin has taken advantage of him? Yes. Whether or not it will stick, whether or not it'll actually benefit Ukraine is still a big question. At the end of the day, we were already, as a coalition, not doing enough for Ukraine to win the war. Kyiv has been bombarded in record ways in the last this last week in what is now a 3-year war. The United States had the opportunity to help Ukraine win. At this point, it's just even saving that the land they currently have will be considered a big deal.
Well, Johnson and Thune are now saying they are ready to go on Russia sanctions come, next week. But does any of this even matter, Daniela, if the president doesn't support the move?
Well, it seems that President Donald Trump is signaling for them to get behind this. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Speaker Mike Johnson, they wouldn't move ahead on this had they feel that they could get the support behind their Republican members and Donald Trump on an issue like this. That's the difference that we're seeing now, Stephanie, than even just a couple of weeks ago, is that they feel now they have the nudging from the president to move forward on this. And worth noting, Peter, of course, brought up that legislation from Senator Graham and Blumenthal, but that legislation has 80 senators already signed on to it. There is a lot of support for this measure in Congress already. So it's just a matter of putting this to a vote to see whether this could pass. But if there's one thing that Republicans tend to break on President Donald Trump, it is on the issue of Russia and supporting Ukraine. There's a lot of staunch Republicans who are staunch allies of President Donald Trump, like Lindsey Graham, who are speaking out and saying we need to act and support Ukraine on this issue and moving toward trying to, of course, set up these sanctions.
All right, Peter, we've got one more topic I want to cover before I let you go. Today, a judge blocked Trump's birthright citizenship order, restricting it once again. Can you explain to us what this means?
Yeah, so what the Supreme Court said just a few days ago was that individual district court judges cannot make universal national decisions on cases like this birthright citizenship challenge. In fact, it was on this birthright citizenship challenge that it made that decision. What they did say was the only way a federal district judge could apply a decision beyond the parties in front of him or her is if there was a class action lawsuit. And what the ACLU has done here said, fine, we're going to create a class action lawsuit. And the judge in this case said, fine, I certify this class. And therefore, now I have agreed with the other judges who said that birthright citizenship is part of the Constitution. And I'm applying it across the country using this class action lawsuit that, in theory, is in conformance with what the Supreme Court says had to happen. Now, what that means is then we'll have a 50-state consistent rule for the moment while they continue to litigate this decision. Before today, you had some states where birthright citizenship might be recognized and some states where it wouldn't be recognized. And what the judge says is you can't do that because it doesn't make any sense to have somebody be a citizen if they're born in Massachusetts, but not if they're born in, say, Texas.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. 7 days after that tragic flooding in Texas, at least 121 people have been confirmed dead, while 166 are still missing. Almost a week out from the initial flooding, search and rescue operations have now shifted to a recovery phase as hope of finding survivors dwindles. And with that horrible reality front of mind, we're starting to learn the ways in which the Trump administration failed in its response to that deadly flooding. According to an eye-opening new report, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, the person ultimately in charge of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, delayed the federal response to that deadly flooding for more than 3 days, even as local search and rescue teams raced to find survivors. As you probably have noticed, Kristi Noem has been the center of a number of stories we've reported on, like the nearly 300 people the administration renditioned to a notorious prison in El Salvador, or the National Guard and Marines dispatched to the streets of L.A. and their show of force there, or the militarized ICE raids scooping up your neighbors across the country, or ICE agents arresting a U.S. senator and New York City controller. And throughout all those very serious stories, she has weirdly acted much more like a social media influencer than a cabinet official. She has spent the bulk of her time dressing up, staging political stunts for social media. like the time she dressed like a firefighter during a training drill in Alaska, or the time she wore a life preserver for a photo shoot with the Coast Guard, or when she put on an ice vest and grabbed a gun to record a video for social media, or this infamous image of her posing in front of detainees at that mega prison wearing a $50,000 watch. Kristi Noem is one of the most powerful people in the U.S. government. She has a profoundly important job and responsibility, and her tenure has been enormously destructive through the intentional dismantling of so much about the fabric of this country, but particularly our emergency disaster response infrastructure, which is, of course, critical to disasters like the flooding in Central Texas. Now, back in June, there's a somewhat little noticed item. We learned about a new policy from the secretary, which, get this, required her direct approval of any DHS contract worth more than $100,000. At the time, lots of folks pointed out how absolutely ludicrous that policy was. One outlet, the Federal News Network, called it, quote, absolutely nuts in a headline. The Daily Kos warned that Noem's DHS disaster could wreck FEMA. I mean, we're talking about an agency that routinely spends billions of dollars on disaster relief. $100,000 is pennies in comparison to what FEMA needs to be able to spend quickly. It was obvious to anyone that knows anything about disaster relief that requiring the secretary's personal approval would create an enormous bottleneck and delay in a situation where time is of the essence. That is exactly what happened. According to a new report citing multiple FEMA sources, Secretary Noem did not sign off on deploying the agency's urban search and rescue team to Texas until this Monday, more than 3 days after the flood struck. Now, you might be wondering what Secretary Noem was doing over that holiday weekend. It turns out on Sunday, one day before finally signing off on the FEMA funding, as search and rescue efforts were frantically ongoing on the ground there, and the clock was ticking to find survivors, Noem did take the time to go to Instagram to generate some audience engagement. Quote, which one do you like for the official governor's portrait to hang in the South Dakota State Capitol? Thank you, David Ewell. Which portrait of herself should be displayed in her old capital? This portrait of Noem on horseback? Or this portrait of Noem on horseback? Or perhaps this portrait of Noem on horseback? When pressed about this reporting on Fox News, Secretary Noem didn't exactly deny it.
CNN is basically got a report accusing you of slowing the process. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, there you go. Fake news. CNN, again, is absolutely trash what they are doing by saying that, because our Coast Guard, our Border Patrol, BORTAC teams were there immediately. Every single thing I was on, they asked for, we were there.
Well, that's not a denial, right? Because it was the search and rescue teams at issue, and it wasn't that they were denied authorization. It's that it came 3 days late. Noem probably doesn't need to worry about her job. I would worry about my own conscience, actually, but she doesn't need to worry about her job. Her boss thinks she's doing a, how would we call it, a heck of a job, to coin a phrase. In fact, her boss just spoke to NBC News' Kristen Welker about it. We don't have a recording, but here's the transcript of what he said when Welker asked, there are these reports that have come out that Secretary Noem, I guess, had to have signed off on FEMA expenditures, and they may have delayed some of the response. Trump responds, quote, I don't know anything about it. We were right on time. We were there. In fact, she was the first one I saw on television. She was there right from the beginning, and when she would not have needed anything, she had the right to do it, but she was literally the first person I saw on television that morning when we all woke up and saw this tragedy that took place during the evening, and she was right on the ball. She's done a great job. She was on TV. So obviously she's doing a great job, right? So good of a job, in fact, that this week she canceled, listen to this, she canceled a $3 million grant that was dedicated to attempting to create a kind of state-of-the-art system that would be able to warn local communities quickly when extreme weather arrives, including in sort of granular detail about which specific areas might be subject to the highest risk. That is even though just a couple of days ago she conceded that our infrastructure is in need of an upgrade in order to give folks adequate warning ahead of natural disasters.
We know that everybody wants more warning time, and that's why we're working to upgrade the technologies that have been neglected by far too long to make sure that families have as much advanced notice as possible.
Well, they didn't have as much advance notice as possible, and the grant that was studying how to do it, you just canceled. The thing is, Secretary Noem fundamentally believes that the federal government, and by extension herself, doesn't manage federal disasters. So, not our problem.
We as a federal government don't manage these disasters. The state does. We come in and support them. And that's exactly what we did here in this situation.
New Jersey Senator Andy Kim is the ranking member of the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Disaster Management. This week, he sent a letter to Secretary Noem demanding the release of her plan for the current hurricane season, and he joins me now. Senator, I want to start with you on that last clip from the Secretary, which is in line with something that the President has articulated. It is a fundamental redirection here. They want to essentially get rid of FEMA and just take the federal government out of disaster response. What do you think of that idea?
Well, you see right now what happens when we have incompetence in terms of leadership at the federal level. No state is going to be able to account for every single possible disaster that's out there and have the resources available in that kind of way to deploy quickly. You know, we need experts. We need people that understand how to be able to respond, be able to anticipate, and be able to have the data to be able to engage. And right now you see somebody who's more interested in doing what I call performative governance rather than actually leading, actually taking the steps. So I really think that, look, there are definitely reforms that need to be made to FEMA. We experienced some challenges when we came to Superstorm Sandy years ago in New Jersey, but that doesn't mean that we just wipe it all out and completely get rid of it. That would be a disaster for our country, and we're seeing some of that problem unfolding right now.
I got to say, I've covered a lot of natural disasters through the years, Superstorm Sandy being one, and hurricanes and droughts and things like that. It is a little weird that the acting administrator from FEMA has no experience in emergency management, doesn't seem to know that there's a hurricane season, maybe he was joking, maybe not, and has said bupkis while they're gutting the agency in the aftermath of this and as we prepare for hurricane season.
Yeah, and also, where is he right now? Like, has anyone actually seen him since this disaster in Texas? I mean, you know, we have a completely absent FEMA acting administrator. And he was not joking that he didn't know when hurricane season was. And actually, when I was doing a nomination hearing of another senior leader of DHS, I asked them, when is hurricane season? They didn't know what timetable was. And look, as we're getting into it, I mean, NOAA, our own National Weather Service, is saying that we could expect upwards of 19 named tropical storms, including upwards of 5 Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes. This is something that's not theoretical in terms of the worry that my state, New Jersey, and up and down the coast is facing. And when we see this kind of incompetence in the response to what's happening in Texas and the horrible tragedy there, it leaves a lot of people in my state and around this country very nervous about what's to come.
You know, this policy they'd announced, which I think anyone, you don't even have to be in government, have to understand, like, the bottleneck you're going to create if the one person at the top has to approve grants at this very small level when you're talking about the budget of the agency. I want to read from the letter you wrote about your concerns about this policy as it relates to hurricane season. You say the reports of FEMA's incomplete hurricane season plan on the cusp of the start of the hurricane season and the slowness in providing the plan to the committee are unsettling. Any such plan must detail how FEMA's life-saving missions will not be hindered by your recent directive, requiring all department obligations over $100,000 be reviewed and approved by your prior to obligation, especially since the memorandum stated your office would take a minimum of 5 days to complete each review. Yeah. This added layer of bureaucracy threatens to delay work that can mean the difference between life and death for disaster victims. Do you think, is this policy still in place as far as you understand it?
As far as I understand it, which is one of the stupidest decisions and policies I've ever heard of, especially when it comes to disaster response. And for an administration that tries to talk about red tape, they are adding red tape here. They are adding bureaucracy. They're making it harder for us to be able to deploy and be able to get resources out. And that's the most serious when it comes to responding to disasters. So, yes, I'm very concerned that if a hurricane hits, certainly if it hits my state in New Jersey, are we going to have to be begging Kristi Noem to be able to get off Instagram to be able to actually go and do her job of trying to approve resources that our state in our country needs so badly. This is a terrible idea to bottleneck. We should be able to pre-position resources. We should give freedom for our disaster response experts to be able to handle this. That is why we have this organization. And especially the minimum 5-day notice that it's going to take for them to be able to approve these, that just shows how it's slowing everything down.
But just fill in a lot of what you report here about how this note came to be.
Well, the note came to be, and you described it accurately, kind of as a report of some issues that analysts found with the earlier Russia election assessment, because John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, ordered analysts to write it back in May, essentially saying to them, all right, I'm tasking you to go look at this assessment and pay particular attention to a key judgment that was made back in 2016, which was that the Russian government aspired, that was the word, to help Donald Trump get elected, which is an issue that John Ratcliffe has been asked about many times in the past, whether he agrees with that assessment, and has notably never said whether he does or doesn't. So the context in which this tradecraft assessment is created is because the director, this politically appointed official, is telling the career analysts to go write about it. And we should also note, and I noted this in my story yesterday from a statement from Jim Clapper, it's highly unusual to order a review like this for a document that by now is 8 going on 9 years old. So it's not entirely clear what Ratcliffe said to these analysts, like why he wanted it done, but the clear direction from him came in May, and the analysts then dutifully wrote the report.
So he asks for a review of the Intel assessment from 2016, and what the analysts give back to Mr. Ratcliffe is more confirmation about the integrity of the intelligence itself. But then is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. The document essentially validates all the original findings. It takes issue with some of the process, but it does not overturn the earlier assessment.
So this is year 9. This is, I think, the third person to run the CIA. I read from Danielle Sassoon, the former prosecutor from SDNY's deputy, who, when he resigned, said, you may find someone foolish enough or cowardly enough to do the things you want me to do. He was speaking about Emile Bove. But is it your sense that what Ratcliffe got these folks to do was to reassess the assessment, and they affirmed the actual intelligence? We'll deal with the process in a second. I just want to make sure I understand that even this, I don't know, 4th CIA director coming in Trump's 2nd term, making these folks do something that you described reads like the written version of a hostage video, also affirmed the assessment about Russia.
Yeah, that's right. They said essentially this is a quality assessment, and it did not come in and overturn the findings. And notably, it did not do the things that John Ratcliffe then publicly claimed that it did. He said in a tweet that John Brennan, Jim Clapper, and James Comey, the former FBI director, had, his words, manipulated intelligence in order to get Trump. The document doesn't say anything like that. It doesn't talk about silencing career professionals, as the CIA director claimed. I don't think you can even say that he's exaggerating or giving a tendentious reading of the document. It just literally doesn't say any of those things, which is, a very surprising thing that he would claim that it does, when anyone can go read these 8 pages for themselves. It'll take you 10 minutes and see that it doesn't say what he's saying. So, I think we're left to presume, did the assessment come back and not make the director happy? Did he think he would find something else? Because he's not accurately portraying what his own analysts at his direction told him.
So let's stop right here. Andrew Weissmann, if there's a theme this week, it's all of the eggs that have been sacrificed to soak the faces of the Trump cabinet. This is, at the core, at the substance, egg on Ratcliffe's face, which is why he sends out a tweet misrepresenting, distorting, I will use the word lying, about what his own CIA note assesses. What are your thoughts about that as just a basic fundamental fact about what gets sent over to DOJ and puts other things in motion?
I think if you step back for a moment and you connect what you're talking about with John Ratcliffe and your discussion and the clips you played with Pam Bondi, you really have here the confrontation of people publicly saying things that are not true, and the fact that people who are sort of career people, or if you were to bring a case, you actually have to have facts. And that's why Pam Bondi may publicly say all sorts of things about Jeffrey Epstein or anybody. You could have the president saying that. You could have the press secretary saying it. But, in a court of law, or if you have career people, they're actually looking at actual facts. And that's why Shane is saying, if you actually look at the hard evidence, it just doesn't support what is being just, spouted, but with no repercussions, just publicly said. And I just can't help but saying this is such a surreal conversation because, yes, this is what the CIA report says, but it's not just in black and white in the CIA report. It was in black and white in the Mueller investigation. It's in black and white in 2 indictments. You can read the emails and text exchanges and the hard evidence from the St. Petersburg, Russia Internet Research Group plotting to help Donald Trump win the election. That doesn't mean Donald Trump was complicit in it, but there is just no question that that's what's going on. And as you noted, Nicole, yesterday, one of the key pieces of evidence here is a Senate report that Marco Rubio is a signatory on, finding the exact same thing. So this is not an open question. This isn't where you say, the two people could have different views. There is only one set of facts, unless you are just publicly going on air and saying something that isn't true.
Shane, your reporting takes the reader through what Andrew's talking about, the exhaustive bipartisan work product of the Senate Intelligence Committee, which I actually think, no disrespect to Andrew Weissmann and the Mueller probe, but is the most scathing and the most brutal takedown of the Trump campaign's shared mission with Russia. I wonder if you could take us through that, where the findings are refuted by the Marco Rubio-led Senate Intelligence Committee and the Durham-led probe into the Russia investigation itself.
Yeah, I mean, the Senate Intelligence Committee spent about 2 years investigating Russia's interference in the election, and then really had a lot more time, frankly, to digest the intelligence and the information than the intelligence community had when they were trying to assess practically in real time what Russia was doing. Their report is 1,300 pages long. They interviewed Director Brennan, Director Comey, Director Clapper, others. They interviewed all the analysts who wrote the assessment that John Ratcliffe has now ordered this review of. And it absolutely confirms, just as Andrew said, what the bottom line assessment was back in 2016. The Russians interfered in the election. They did it through placing divisive social media, through hacking Democratic emails and leaking them through intermediaries. They intended to denigrate Hillary Clinton in order to help Donald Trump. And, it's important to note, too, the Senate Intelligence Committee had access to the highly classified information that some of these findings, or really all of these findings, were based on, that the CIA had, that the NSA also had, and the FBI. They reviewed all the work and they came to the same conclusion. And you can go read it for yourself. I mean, this report is public, and you can go find the sections that are of interest to you and walk through it chapter and verse. The Durham report is also notable. And in my story, I have a letter that Clapper and Brennan's lawyer sent to John Durham after they'd given their long interviews, essentially laying out for the record, right, here's everything my clients told you about their role in crafting the assessment, what they did do, what they did not do, importantly. And there was a lot of expectation at the time that John Durham was reviewing how the FBI had conducted its investigation into the Russia probe, that he was going to come up with some evidence that intelligence officials had somehow skewed this, or maybe cooked things up, or were framing it to make it look worse for Donald Trump, or allege associations that weren't there. And he didn't find that. He just didn't come up with anything like that. And he ultimately did not dispute in any way the original election interference assessment. So I think, the Durham report is notable for everything he did review. And to be clear, he took a lot of issue with the way the FBI conducted their investigation, but it's notable for what he did not find. He did not find the kind of malfeasance by intelligence leaders that the current CIA director, John Ratcliffe, is now alleging, and claims that this Tradecraft review shows, when it very obviously does not.
So how do we arrive at this point? I guess I'll let you try to answer this, Andrew Weissmann, where a criminal investigation has been confirmed to be underway into John Brennan and Jim Comey over the Russia probe.
Well, John Brennan said something in the clip you played where he said, it's not usual to have this sort of leak happen. That's an understatement. And I think that viewers can take from that what is going on here. Obviously, that leak is not coming from Jim Comey or John Brennan. And so you have to ask yourself, why would they be doing that? When you're in the Department of Justice, it is the rule is sort of put up or shut up. It is like you either, indict somebody or you're not supposed to have them subjected to the public opprobrium of a criminal investigation. So this, to me, sort of reeks of a distraction, a sort of like look over here at the birdie. And don't look at other things. It's also notable, if you're thinking about sort of what's going on, there is normally a 5-year statute of limitations to bring a criminal case. My first reaction to this was, excuse me? I mean, not only is there nothing I know that would suggest there should be a criminal investigation, but of course, as you noted, we don't obviously know everything that would be within the department. So giving them the benefit of the doubt, I don't think they deserve it. But let's say we do that. It's still totally unclear how they're going to have a criminal investigation if what they're looking at is something that happened in 2016. That is not something within a 5-year statute of limitations. I don't do math publicly, but even I can do that math.